Let's get it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Bullpen. In the Bullpen today, we have Ms. Leslie Corbly, writer and commentator, Young Voices. Leslie, good to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm well, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. We are going to chop it up about the reality of social media, regulation or deregulation. What will it be? I don't want to assume what you know, believe about that topic. So if you would give us your sentiment, and I would then opine.
Sure. So generally speaking, I like to see the internet free and free speech to dominate on the internet. That's foundational to sort of a liberty and general libertarian view that I hold. And of course, that would include wanting the government out of social media decision making regarding what content they do or do not platform. So my biggest concern would be if the government were jawboning or in any way coercing social media companies regarding the decisions that they make.
I'm with you on the government part. I don't want the government, Republican or Democrat, regime to be able to say to a private company, hey, you can't do that, you can't say that. Now there are some reasonable circumstances like, putting a hit out of somebody or threatening to kill someone, right? Those are against the law. But outside of the context of government, let's say coercion, you would also want a social media company to not be able to regulate their own content? Or are you okay with a social media company regulating content on their platform that they deem to be inappropriate?
Oh, certainly I have no issue with social media companies broadly determining what content they will or will not platform. Okay. I do think as far as like a social issue goes, I think consumers should be very aware of what the rules governing a social media company's content platforming scheme is. And by that, I mean, I think it is wise for consumers to want to have a voice in that, right? Oh, if you're working with a company, say, that has a more censorious attitude as it relates to what they will or will not platform, you may want to be aware of that. So when you're determining which platforms you want to operate accounts on, you have kind of a heads up on that. And I think that also keeps a good milieu within the whole environment as far as ensuring that companies are gearing their policies towards their consumers, right? So I think that there's a strong consumer interest there. But as far as it relates to legal regulations, no, I would not want the government having any. I really don't want the government to have any say at all as in relation to what is on social media.
I'm glad you said that, because I think it's the height of hypocrisy when former President Donald Trump attempted to file a class action lawsuit against social media, claiming that these private companies violated his freedom of speech by deplatforming his rhetoric, right? And he is literally in his lawsuit asking the government to allow him to have a stronger voice than the private company that also has First Amendment protections. Did you agree with Trump's lawsuit when he filed it on any premise at all?
No, I can't say that I do. I'm not really a huge fan of that tactic as it relates to dealing with this issue.
But you saw that it was hypocritical. Like when you read the actual case, it was a very hypocritical case at face value, because you're literally telling the government to now get involved when you said the reason this is happening is because the government is involved and should not be.
Sure, it seeks to address a problem in a very inappropriate way, in my opinion, right? So there's a real problem here, and instead of taking a legitimate route to address that problem, Trump goes a different way, unsurprisingly. But no, I again, broadly speaking, not in favor of the government being the actor that needs to solve this problem. I do think there's a broader problem as it relates to private and public spheres merging with that's just general though with technology, and I think that undergirds a lot of these issues, and we haven't really as a society teased out what that's going to look like, and that's again where my strong interest is. Let's solve this in a private manner. Like I think that again, private and public spheres are merging, and I don't want the government to end up having a coercive effect on the private sphere that's not appropriate.
I'm so happy that you have linear integrity about what you believe. Because we have had individuals on this program who literally will make the same argument that you're making that government should not be involved, and then support Donald Trump's lawsuit where he's asking the government to be involved in social media. You're not making that contention here. You're remaining linear in your logic, and it does make sense. You do have some nuance that's worth trying to, let's just say, detangle. Let's talk about Section 230.
Sure.
Section 230 obviously was a way for certain platforms to not receive civil penalty because they're not really publishing content. They're simply allowing you to publish content. And that means if you publish content on their platform and you are, let's say, defaming someone, that the company that you published the content on their platform cannot be held liable, but you still can be held liable. That has permeated into something else now because of the advent of social media and how we look at platforming technologies. What are your thoughts about Section 230 and how it applies today or should not apply today?
Sure. So as to Section 230 itself, I don't have a lot of like really strong opinions on legal changes to that. I think that there's a lot of nuance and a lot of strong arguments on both sides that I've seen, and I have a really strong opinion on that. That being said, I do think consumers need to be aware of what the environment right now on social media looks like, because in my opinion, what I really want to see is to see consumers take more ownership of the public conversation itself and start to place more costs on companies for what they perceive to be poor behavior, so that the entire social media ecosystem is more driven to consumer needs rather than the opinions of regulators or government actors or really strong, maybe social media influencers. I would really like to see it be more consumer driven.
Every person, and I agree with you on that notion, every person literally signs a user agreement before they are platformed, right? Trump had to sign a user agreement too, even though obviously he forgot about that contract when he sued those same social media companies. Now, personally, I don't want a social media platform that allows for racism, N-word, etc. Because I have a daughter and I have young mentees. I don't want them exposed to that because they are on the platform. All right, I would prefer to protect them from it. So I'm okay with the private company saying, these are our rules. This will get you deplatformed. Don't do it. If you do so, it'll be at your own peril. You're not arguing like, let's say, Elon Musk once argued. He doesn't argue that today as much. But you're not a purist in that sense. You're not saying all speech, no matter what, should be allowed and companies should have no right to regulate that kind of speech. That's not your argument.
No, that's not the argument I'm making right now at all. Weirdly, what I'm saying is I think there's actually a bias that I want to bring up in the tech sphere, and a bias towards the idea that information traveling as quickly as possible to as many people as possible through as many mediums as possible is sort of always a good thing. And I think that it can be, depending on the context. And I think a lot of what we're missing at the time right now with social media and with our conversations in this sphere is context itself. There are times when allowing as much speech as possible in a private setting is more beneficial. And then there's times where you can have a more private event or something where limiting the type of people there or limiting the speech there has benefits as well. So I think a lot of it's context dependent, and of course I want companies to be able to allow whatever speech they would like. I just don't want the government to have anything to do with regulating speech in any way, shape, or form in the public sphere.
Well, that's what the Constitution basically says. Once again, with appropriate restrictions or allowances for that. I will say this: 57% of Americans are actually in favor of the regulatory dynamics that exist contextualized in the private company, not the government, but the private company. And only 15% of Americans, based on the YouGov.com survey, actually would like to see less regulation as it relates to these private companies. Private companies, at the end of the day, they're the ones who have to drive this ship, not the government, and obviously not a lawsuit telling the government to get involved.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, individual responsibility also should drive this as well. That's what I mean as someone who cares a lot about freedom and responsibility. I think that those run together, and I would really like to see the public conversation geared more towards the consumer rather than the. I still think that's really what's governing the conversation right now, and I would prefer to see that driving the ship rather than the desires of regulators or the kind of job owning that we're seeing right now that sort of tends to drive where the conversation is headed. And of course, I do think, again, from a consumer standpoint, I think consumers should be very aware of this, like, for instance, the size of a social media company, the kind of values that they espouse to have, so that they can be aware as they're navigating what is an increasingly complex media landscape, what it is that the company stands for and whether the consumer wants to engage in a specific manner with that company. I think if individuals take quite a bit more of an empowerment stance within this sphere, it would have a lot of benefits.
I think it would definitely transform some things. Truth Social, for example, Donald Trump's social media platform, they had a premise in the beginning that basically said everybody's welcome, you can say what you want to say. I joined just to mess with them. I was deplatformed immediately. So it shows the hypocrisy in their own proclamations about how this should work. I'm with you on the private sector part. I've always believed that the consumer should drive the ship with the private company. The government getting involved is messy, but let me give you a nuance even to that. Let's say the government has a list somewhere. It could be CDC.gov, it could be the White House. And they say, these things we hold to be true. These things we hold to be false. And a private company said, you know what, we're going to look at that as part of our weighing of what we decide to classify as misinformation or not. Do you think that, and I'm not talking about coercion, no contact. I'm talking about literally a document they can go to, it's online, produced by the government, they utilize it privately as a way to weigh their own internal structure. Do you have a problem with that?
As far as a hypothetical, no. If the company is clear about what they deem to be misinformation and what the rules governing deplatforming are, I think that's fine. As to what's actually currently occurring, I would say it looks quite a bit more coercive at the moment. And as far as hopefully solutions in the future, I would like to see there be more transparency from the companies, less contact with the government overall, and a better ability of consumers to engage in ways that empower consumers rather than lead to sort of the, like you mentioned, a lot of hypocrisy on all sides stemming from the blending of these private and public spaces.
Yeah. Very thankful for your thoughtful debate. I appreciate you. We're going to have you back on the show, okay?
Thank you.
Absolutely.